Hi everybody, this is Craig Tanner for The Mindful Eye and the Daily Critique. Today's image was submitted by John, who's an intermediate photographer from California. Right away, I like the simplicity of this image. Just a few subjects: the lock, the shadow of the lock, and the background of the door. There are also some color ideas that are playing out here that really connect to sort of three things that I teach when I talk about simplifying color. Most of the time, for me, when color doesn't work, it's just because it's overwhelming. There are too many color ideas, too much happening with color. And there's sort of three ways that we could think about simplifying color. One is choosing subjects like John has here where you don't have that many color ideas. To me, when I look at this and I think about not colors so much themselves, because black is not a color, but color ideas, I think about rust, I do think about black, and then I think about sort of varying shades of gray. So very, very simple from a color standpoint, not many colors. Also talk quite a bit about very graphic, simple images where shapes are colors and colors are shapes. And you're really seeing that play out here. And then the other thing I think about when I think about simplifying color but doing it in a dynamic way is creating areas that are visual sea level when it comes to color. And by that I mean having areas that are truly gray or truly black or truly white without a color cast. And you definitely have a very large area of this image, to me at least on my monitor, that feels neutral gray, and that can really help the colors that are there to come forward and to separate in a powerful way. So I'm really enjoying this image in terms of color. This image has another design concept that I talk about quite a bit, and it's a very sort of archetypal convention in both still photography and cinema, which is the idea of juxtaposing the feeling of geometry that's more natural or circular or flowing with geometry that is harder edged and is more rectangular or square. In cinema, if you study cinematic conventions, we talk about sort of man-made geometry versus natural geometry. And it's a very, very powerful concept, and it's just one of the many archetypal ways to create an interesting juxtaposition for the viewer. There are also some beautiful textures that are playing out here, and this image is a good example of how hard light and side light can create the difference between light and shadow and can bring up the feeling, even in a very flat subject, of more texture by creating more of a dramatic lighting pattern where you have light to dark, and that starts to imply depth even in very, very flat areas like this. These shadows right in here are giving us the feeling of the texture of the wood, and that juxtaposes really beautifully with the texture of the rusted lock. A lot of things to really enjoy about this image. There's some really beautiful, powerful archetypal shapes being expressed here. When I start to think about a perfect world variation for this image, there are two basic design concepts that I think about. One is just simple balance. So simple image to begin with. Top and bottom are balanced in a very symmetrical way. Corners are balanced. It's sort of all this simple pattern of the wood. When I look from left to right, I see this real strong movement on this diagonal. The cut over here on the shadow of the lock has created this real flat idea in terms of the way this shape ends up playing out relative to the edge of the frame. Over here, not so much. We get pulled into this area right here, real dramatic negative space. There's a lot of positive and negative space shapes happening, a lot of contrast in here. And I personally get a little bit overwhelmed with that, and it starts to make me think of a crop where I come in and cut this over here in a way where it will get rid of a lot of the information along the left-hand side that's taking me out of the design of the image. If I cut there, then this shape in here plays off of this shape here, but it's dynamic because it's really sort of the opposite in terms of light and shadow. This idea, that's a very, very powerful archetype. The keyhole will start to come in a more powerful way, and it also can play off of the shape of the shadow itself. I think it'll be simpler, and then I would get rid of some of the negative space at the top and the bottom, so I'd square this up a little bit more. So my crop here would look something like this, coming over to about right there, and then coming down from the top somewhere like this, coming up from the bottom somewhere like this. That would be my new crop. So here's the before and here's the after. To me, there's more of a feeling of balance from left to right now, but the other design idea that I'm thinking about when I make this crop, so I'm thinking about the idea of abstract versus literal. In a real basic way, we could say that when we're abstracting a subject, we're getting further away from what the subject is and just describing it literally, which is one way to shoot in photography. Very powerful concept. One of my favorite photographers of all time. In fact, the first coffee table book I ever purchased as a photographer was called American Prospects by Joel Sternfeld. And in some respects, those pictures are Joel Sternfeld choosing very fascinating subjects and then shooting them in a seemingly very straightforward way. That is one of many, many, many ways to think about design and creativity and concept when it comes to photography. If we start to move towards an abstract, we get away from saying, I'm going to choose something that's interesting and just show it to you. I'm going to say, we're going to choose something, and I'm going to show it to you in a way where you're going to pay more attention to the intrinsic qualities, the colors, the form, the texture, and I'm going to move you further away from what it actually is. And this crop, to me, in the beginning, is almost sort of like a mix between something that's starting to become abstract, particularly over here on the right-hand side, and then something that's more literal on the left-hand side. And for me, the sort of literal of the lock ends up kind of overwhelming the other parts that are more about things like form and quality of line. And when I crop it like this, it starts to push more towards overall and abstract, where the design concept of literal and abstract are not fighting so much against each other. And then from here, the other thing that I personally would do, knowing that this is really hard light, looking at the shadow and the edge of the shadow and just a feeling of very direct light, I would darken this down quite a bit. I would try to even make the difference between light and shadow even more dramatic. There's so many ways we could do this. I'm just going to quick do it in a rough way. I'm just going to use curves. So we could just use a simple curve. So much of the time when I do a curves adjustment, I'll try to steepen the curve a little bit to just add a little bit more contrast. Something like that. That's very, very quick. Just a rough curves adjustment. I am going to still apply this in a local way. So I'm going to go ahead and do a Command Delete and fill the mask with black and get my brush. This will give me a chance to say whenever I'm managing or editing on a mask like this that I always have zero hardness on the brush, and that I typically start with big brushes and start with lower opacities, and then kind of do subtle brush strokes and subtle changes, and then build all that up. One of the things that I'd like to do here relative to that kind of work is I would like to make this bottom part much darker. And I'm going to kind of bias that to begin with. And then I'm going to get a lot bigger brush, and I'm going to kind of make it a little bit darker everywhere, and leaving that bottom a little bit darker. And then I also like to sort of create a little bit of a feeling of a vignetting mask. And the reality is from here, let's see, I'm liking the way that's looking now. I probably would darken the corners even a little bit more. We could just do that real quick with another curves adjustment layer. So I'm just going to go here. I'm going to get the target adjustment tool and just see where these values are. They're right there in the middle. Let's pull down even more. Go right back to layers. Command Delete on a Mac. Control Delete on a PC to fill the mask with black. B for the brush key. About 20% opacity. I just did that hitting the 2 key. I'm just going to come in and create even more of a feeling along the edges of those corners being darker to just contain the eye. I'm going to make that area in there a little bit darker. And so that's what our two curves layers did for us. And the last thing that I'll say is that in a perfect world, considering how flat that background is, you can see that the implication of sharpness is strong here, pretty strong here. It starts to fall off at the bottom. We may have been able to correct that by, if this is the door, making sure the camera is parallel, that the back of the camera, the digital sensor, is parallel to the door itself. I wish this was sharper down here in a bigger print. That might start to really draw the eye, the fact that it's not sharp. Maybe stopping down just a little bit more, just working on having the back of the camera more parallel with the subject itself. Really beautiful image. Really like where John started off with this in the beginning. I don't know that I can get all the way back to the beginning. I like to go back to the beginning, but I can't. I've run out of history state since I edited on the mask in the way that I did. So we'll just imagine John's original shot. Great selection of subject matter, particularly considering the quality of light. I love the fact that John got close, and I love the way he was working with color and implying these really beautiful shapes and textures Great image. Wanted to say a big thank you to John for sharing it with us on the Mindful Eyes Daily Critique. Hope to see you again real soon, everybody.